The views and opinions expressed in this video are those of the speakers and panelists, and do not necessarily reflect the position of the Ethos Institute for Public Christianity and its founding institutions and organizations.
Is Jesus God?
Migrant workers and human rights from a Christian perspective.
Marriage and family.
ISIS presents a much bigger threat.
How do we integrate the Bible with our scientific understanding?
Are you able to actually describe and articulate clearly your own sense of purpose in life?
In case some of you may not be familiar with some of the things that we do, I have an interest in the issue about diversity and its management. We do a lot of work in that, so it's got a bit of research. If you go to our website or my profile page, there'll be a lot of studies that you can have a look at, which looks at some aspects of diversity and inclusion and some of the debates around there. Lots of empirical work. Partly the place I am at, or the lab that I lead, is a lab that talks to about 60,000 Singaporeans every year and talks to them on a whole range of different issues. We've got many other ways of engaging, whether it's on the internet, whether it's on ethnographers going on the field, being with people. So many different ways of trying to get a good sense of how Singaporeans think about a whole range of issues. Many of them are issues to do with social cohesion, a number of areas, whether it's on income, poverty, gender issues, a whole range of them. But I'm also very proud about another piece of work that I've been able to do over the last couple of years, and that's to lead a particular program. It's called the IPS program on race, religion, and intergroup cohesion. Over the years of doing research, I've always been flagging different areas where there are concerns and issues, and after a while people said, Matthew, stop all this telling us all the problems, you all try to go and solve the problem. And I think about solutions to it. And so one solution that we realized was very important was to help shift people's thinking about some issues to do with diversity and how to live in society in a multicultural way. And so over the last couple of years, through some generous funding that we were able to get, we were able to develop some programming which we're proud to say when we try to measure the impact of it is very, very substantial in terms of changing people's perceptions. We use a lot of all the new gimmicks, or not gadgets, that are possible, eye tracking, not gimmicks, sorry, really not gimmicks. Gadgets that help people to put themselves in the shoes of other people, be able to think in various ways. So we've got a very, very interesting team doing that. So I'll try to use some of the insights and ideas that I'll probably share today also come from some of our observations, and as we engage many different groups and have them discuss many of these sensitive issues related to race, religion, and other issues of diversity, and some of the rich conversations that come with that. All right, so just to get a sense of what we're trying to do today, we'll talk a little bit about these areas, talk a little bit about diversity and harmony in Singapore, which I think everybody is very familiar with. I'll just give my take on that, talk about some of the context, look at some of the expectations that Singaporeans have about religion, and of course, some of the concerns that keep coming out in our attempt to live in a religiously diverse society. All right. These are things that are motherhood statements, but I can't help but say it again. Singapore has a high level of religious diversity, and this continues to be the case. In fact, if you look at this graph, I mean, if you look at the world, it's very different, right? You can go to, I think there is a particular world library of indexes, so you can pull the data of the whole world in terms of aspects of religion, and we can kind of plot it out in different ways. But what's very clear is that when they try to index the world is not the same, right? Religious diversity around the world is not the same. And in fact, many countries, religious diversity is a lot lower. Singapore has a very high level of diversity. The global north is increasingly having more diversity, but it's not been traditionally the case. But if you just look at this, Singapore does stay quite high on the line. A country like Australia, for instance, I just added Australia just to have a look. It has very, very low diversity, but it's going up. And with all the Singaporeans going to Australia, it's changed the complexion of Australia. And other countries, you look at Malaysia and Indonesia, over time you might see even a dipping of diversity, partly because of either movements of people away from the country, or rather because of the rate of reproduction, which is higher in some communities versus others. So religious diversity is a trend which you see all throughout the world, but though not necessarily everywhere. And the forecast for the years to come is different in different parts of the world. The notion when we think about diversity, especially being in a religious diverse society, it's often associated with the notion of conflicts. Conflicts do come. And of course, these pictures about Myanmar and ethno-religious type of conflicts in Philippines and other parts of the world are not at all unfamiliar to us. But in Singapore, we do have a very different story to tell despite the high amount of diversity, which really is rather special. If you kind of think about it, go to different parts of the world, there is something to be said about the level of diversity and the harmony that comes with that. If you look at this chart, this comes from a very, very recent piece of research that we put out recently. These are large sample studies, so you can be quite sure that they are very accurate, and we put a lot of funds to make sure that we've got these data. You can find this in our most recent publication, which comes up from some of the surveys that we did late last year in 2024. If you ask Singaporeans, you can see very, very clearly that Singaporeans say that we have a high level of harmony. People would say low, it's extremely small. And so this pertains to religious and racial harmony. In fact, Christians and those who are non-religious are more likely to indicate very high levels of harmony compared to Muslims and Hindus. Now, I'm not saying that they don't sense harmonious relationships, but in comparison to the very high levels of harmony that those who might be of the majority would feel, Muslims and Hindus, and I think that it's also associated with their with racial backgrounds as well, would consider harmony to be a little less. There will be slightly more minorities or ethnic minorities who would say that racial and religious harmony in Singapore is moderately high. And when we think about notions of religious harmony in Singapore and racial harmony in Singapore, it is very hard to divorce it from the action of the state. When we often look at Singapore's harmony as being highly state-managed. Whether this is good or bad is a big question. Often in some of the seminars that we do, we have this little question about the government is responsible for racial and religious harmony, and we ask people to kind of poll what they feel about that, right? And invariably, everybody seems to think that it's the government's job to do that. And very, very high proportions of people feel that it's. But increasingly, you realize that there are concerns about this. When everything is placed in the government realizes that there's just no way to solve every single issue that comes with racial and religious harmony. A lot of it does also depend on the community being able to navigate itself, think about ways of engaging, changing prejudices, learning how to live in a more harmonious way. So it does take individual action as well, and it cannot just be left to a regime of laws and regulations. But then, of course, we have started on that footing of a very, very strictly police system of racial and religious harmony. But now you see a need to kind of change. And of course, that's why recently when they had the racial harmony bill, one part of it was the component of community rehabilitation or community mediation, or attempts to work through the community as a small way of being able to signal to people that it's more than just state action. It's also something that the community should get involved in. Some quick notions about the context for religious harmony in Singapore, which again, I think we should never forget. Our history has helped us to learn that negotiation is a necessity in the way we live in Singapore today. It was not a given right from the start in the treaty between the East India Company and the Malay rulers. There was an understanding about protection of Islam and Malays. And of course, that paved the way for the notion about state management of religion. And at the same time, also the fact that as a port city, the kind of diversity which came into Singapore at that point of time with very little real strong controls to maintain any kind of balance would require people then to find organic ways of being able to try to negotiate and try to make settlements so that they would not be in major risk or great tension. We, of course, have our early experience of communal conflict, and which, of course, guided the state's firm management of race and religion. In fact, if you can remember, Maria Hartog was when Mr. Lee Kuan Yew came back from London as a practicing lawyer. I think it's the first case he took up was to defend some of the Malays who were involved in that particular riot. So very clearly, some of the issues of the riot continue to have a very, very major salience to early leaders. But this notion about race and religion being areas of sensitivity, areas that you don't manage well, can lead to potential violence, seems to be something that many Singaporeans share. So obviously, I mean, some would argue that this is the government having had a long campaign to try to help Singaporeans to think about how dangerous race and religion, or rather the mismanagement of it is, but it still sticks with a lot of Singaporeans. I mean, we look at many areas of what we call fault lines in Singapore, whether it's about issues to do with sexuality or socioeconomic class, or a whole range of them. Singaporeans normally look at many of those areas as issues where, you could have polarization or anger between communities. But when it comes to race and religion, many more people are likely to say, hey, if you don't manage it, it's going to cause violence. It's partly history, it's partly what the state has, how the state has packaged the whole issue. And also, it's also our observation of what happens around the world. Ethnic conflict, religious conflict seems to be a staple in many parts of the world. And people do realize that when we don't seem to manage that, it has major consequence. We should, of course, not forget the fact that there's always been organic attempts to foster religious harmony. This has had a long history. It predates what the government did in terms of instituting firm policies about that. The IRO in Singapore started off in 1949, so that's quite a few years, even before Singapore's independence. A few things about Singapore's multicultural model, and of course this is the CMIO model, but if you can think about this even in the context of religion, I think the principles are important. The idea that you can have unity, whether it's racial unity despite our differences in races or religion, but yet keep those distinctive aspects of it. That seems to be important in the model. As you can kind of know in the model, the whole idea is that in the intersection of all these different groups, and currently this is racial groups, but if you think about all the different religions, the intersection of that should be our common experiences that we have as a society. Besides being a Christian, we are also something else within society. We're Singaporeans, we are members of particular ethnic groups, we are part of different groupings, and we have similar, for many of us, similar kind of experiences in schooling and in national service for men. So there are many experiences that we have living in Singapore, which kind of provides us a certain kind of commonality, and that intersection is supposed to grow over the years, becoming more and more prominent. But yet, the distinctions, the distinctives that come with our different religious backgrounds continue to be there, and are accepted. So Singapore does not have a model that one day we'll all either give up all our religious beliefs and take on this belief that the state solves all problems and come up some kind of communist utopia. We don't. It's an idea that people will stay religious, have strong religious sensibilities, but yet find ways of creating some common space, and that becomes a very important aspect of Singapore. And of course, through the structures of various kinds of programs, whether it's our HTP policies, the idea that we will all learn how to accommodate, how to learn to be tolerant, how to enjoy and embrace multicultural living, based on the fact that naturally, given these structures and how we have to associate, how we have to make things happen, then somehow or another we will develop that kind of strength. But then that is not minus off the fact or subtract the fact that beyond individuals' attempts and propensity to try to build multiculturalism or embrace that ethos, it's also the role of the state in policing to ensure harmony. And of course, you would be familiar with the different kind of situations and scenarios where, or instances where individuals have been prosecuted because they have breached various kinds of regulations related to the maintenance of religious harmony. And of course, there's constant vigilance against the threats which can be posed, oftentimes external to our society. For those of us who have had the I mean, if you troll the internet and read how other people talk about religious differences, you would see, I mean, it would seem, even in circles which would be Christian, it would be very, very not generous, very unkind statements of other individuals and groups, which are very, very different from what many of us feel is necessary for good witness as Christians. But people think differently in other parts of the world, and this, of course, is, you can see that across religious groups where people find, especially in contexts where people have lots of freedom to express what they feel. I mean, very often misinformation, fake news, attempts to assassinate other groups or mischaracterize other groups seem to be very, very common. At the same time, there's also this recognition that while you want to ensure everyone practices their religious beliefs and lives out their faith in the way they want to, and when accommodation needs to be given to different groups, then a consideration has to be made about whether those accommodations would have an effect on the whole group, entire Singapore population. So, as you remember, the whole issue about the hijab, the tudung for Muslim nurses, was something which many people don't seem to understand. I mean, wonder why it seems to be a given. What's the big deal? Most people don't have major issues, or we think about that. But the state was very concerned about ensuring that no change, a concession like that, one, of course, would not lead to many more concessions. And particularly the notion that you don't want to make religious identifier so prominent such that it would distract people from this idea that we are together within society, of course. So it would not get into a school system, for instance, where people would call for tudungs for girls in school. So various kinds of attempts to think about how any of these changes would have knock-on effects in terms of how individuals, how groups in society differentiate themselves, exclude themselves, or feel that their community is separate from everybody else. So that seems to be an important consideration. All right, so let me move on to this idea about the expectations that Singaporeans have about religion. And so we kind of give it a little bit of a context about, one, of course, the fact that we do have the fortune of being in a society where harmony is of high levels, and it's not just something that is mouthed out, it's something that people feel, experience, live out, very happy about. We, of course, know what it took to ensure such harmony. Then, of course, we think about what Singaporeans in general think about the kind of what they see as roles that religion should play, what they expect of it. A couple of these are just some, again, some attempts to kind of look at. This is part of a study that we did recently on national identity and aspects of pride in the nation. If you can notice, religious diversity and freedom, there were more than, this is 24, there were a whole bunch of other items. So it's quite religious diversity and freedom happens to be very, very high on the list of things that Singaporeans are actually proud about. So that speaks for something. But then, of course, at the same token, because we're so proud about it, we want to make sure that we protect harmony and we protect this ability of Singaporeans to be able to live well in a religiously diverse society. And with that, then there's a question when we ask people, if a newcomer comes into Singapore, what are important values that they must embrace to successfully fit in or integrate into Singapore? And if you notice, apart from rule of law, which is number one, tolerance and multiracialism are very, very high on the list. And so it's very clear. It shows how Singaporeans want people, of course, expect citizens and also newcomers to be able to live in a society where you're tolerant, you accept the differences that come with multicultural living, you embrace that, you recognize it's not a weakness, it's actually a strength for society, and you are able to navigate that successfully. And so then there's a strong expectation that religion plays that role of being a unifying force rather than one which is divisive within Singapore society. And so, as you can notice, many of the different kind of celebrations at IRO and other kinds of inter-religious kind of organizations, notions that religious leadership becomes the embodiment of Singapore's efforts to maintain social cohesion. We do have various aspects of cohesion, whether it's issues to do with integration, social class, and in different areas where we do have differences. But somehow or other, the fact that you have religious leaders who in many other societies are really polar opposites, have nothing to do with each other, would always be throwing vitriol against somebody else. To be able to have them come together in the same Zoom room and all pledge that, in COVID, we're trying to build tolerance and harmony and try to keep cohesion, that signals something, and that has I think it's really an embodiment of what we stand for as a society to keep harmonious relationships, cohesion happening. And of course, in such a context, then where we have diversity and we have good levels of management of diversity, it sets the stage for us to be able to better understand people of other backgrounds and also build cooperation and work together with people in different ways. I know years ago, at the start of my academic career, this is like 20 or something, 04, 05, something like that. I did a piece of research which, we surveyed a lot of clergy people, and I don't know why I ended up publishing it. It's not my fault. Straits Times, which wanted to blow it out, but it was about, and it was picked up, right? This idea that Christian clergy were quite weary about interreligious dialogue. In fact, the figures actually for interreligious cooperation, it was charitable cooperation. Now you're talking about, doing something deeper or getting involved in worship or anything like that. Just simply about doing a charitable deed with members of another religious group was something that many Christian clergy here felt would not be acceptable. But of course, we've come a long way from there, and there's so many more activities where there is genuine attempts to show that we understand, we're willing to work and cooperate with different groups, which might hold very different theological positions, but yet in the sake of showing our common humanity, we're willing to relate, we're willing to, for many Christians, show Christ's love and the willingness that to show that we are peacemakers in these situations. So I think that has been well noted over the years. A couple more points before I close. How many more minutes do I have, Jordan? 10 more minutes. Okay, excellent. Oh, very good. Let me end off by discussing some of the concerns about living in a religiously diverse society. It's certainly, the idea that we are able to have this kind of diversity also brings with it various kinds of concerns with different groups of individuals. So this comes from, not from our research, it's actually from Pew Research 2023 study. And it looked at, it asked a set of questions about how you feel connected to other religions. So in Singapore, it's, comparatively high compared to other religions. 26% of Singaporean adults said that they feel a personal connection to other religions other than their own. So this is kind of this idea that you, besides your own religion, you have this kind of connection with other religions. I don't have the exact way they asked it, but it was really this notion about connection. You feel a connection to some other religion. And in the Pew Research document, they hail that as something very different, unique about the Singapore situation. So what you do have is that you have religious contact, and of course this place has allowed people from very different backgrounds to have contact, and there has been a certain kind of pluralism, which of course has extended even to certain kind of syncretism. You notice whether it's Kusu Island, whether it is some Taoist temples which also have Hindu deities within it. You have a certain kind, the picture there is of a Chinese Taoist Kavadi carrier. So this notion that different religious traditions somehow or other find connection with each other, and there is a certain kind of, and sometimes very, very much more of a syncretic kind of mix that comes with that. Now, of course, that is, depending on religious position that you take, that could, of course, be very, very full of lots of discomfort when that happens. But that is, obviously something that happens within Singapore society because of that close connections between different groups. It's kind of interesting when we look at some of our survey results sometimes about Christians now. In general, Singaporean Christians are conservative, but you have some interesting profiles of Christians who also, for instance, believe in reincarnation or karma or some other notions about, not very common within standard Orthodox Christianity. But then it speaks about the fact that because of this, the many interchanges that people have, people of different religious backgrounds, and the percolation of ideas and notions, you'd expect then to have this kind of scenarios where people would have various ideas. And of course, the rise of inter-religious marriages, for that matter, would also then result in not just a partner having a different view about things, but also maybe the children having a kind of more syncretic way of approaching religious beliefs. Some are comfortable, some are not comfortable about that. Then, of course, this extends to notions about, the first one, of course, syncretic kind of practice, is a particular category. Then, of course, just the normal living with people from other backgrounds, or perhaps religious institutions or places of worship close to your place, and which many Singaporeans are very comfortable living with, having a temple or mosque or something like that around their home. It doesn't make too much of a difference. But less with mosque and Hindu temples. I don't put it down, but of course Christians have a lot more concerns about different spaces. Now, of course, one concern from this diagram is the fact that the greater concern tends to be on faiths like Islam and Hinduism, which then, of course, are smaller by proportion. Familiarity gaps are much higher because I guess if you're Chinese by ethnicity and you have family which is Taoist, Buddhist, maybe that the knowledge about that particular religious tradition is still intact. But when it comes to a faith which is quite different, then, of course, there are more and more concerns that come with that. This is another interesting finding. This comes from a number of those questions we asked about who do you employ, whether these would be potential considerations in employment, and we asked people also about, and this is a little bit more intimate, obviously, a caregiver. If you have a child and you have a caregiver for a child, would any of these things be a consideration? We asked many questions. Whether race or gender, a whole range. Sexual orientation, the whole range of things might be potential considerations. But what is interesting is also that religion is a consideration for some. And for Christians, about 6 out of 10 would say that there are at least some importance in terms of the religion of the caregiver. So there are some kind of consideration. So someone, of course, would say that despite our plural society, there are obviously levels of concern that we have. Maybe we are okay with someone being a neighbor, but if you're going to be more closely related to my child, for instance, then I want to be sure that your religious beliefs are compatible with mine, and that would be the only way I feel safe, for instance. And of course, some would say that might be problematic. Last few slides as I close. Of course, it is one thing about people's concerns, which comes with living with people of different kinds of religious backgrounds and faith. There's also the concern about the growing proportion of Singaporeans who are becoming religious nuns and giving up religion or not affiliating with a religion. As you notice, Christianity continues to rise at small levels, but the other group that's rising is also people with no religion. It's going up by, I think, the last census, about 3% or so. Not very big, but certainly clearly you can note the increase which is happening. And of course, with that, there's also a lot of concerns about that the non-affiliated will push back stronger against religion. And that is the case in many countries where you have militant secularists and those who would be very, very firm and adamant against religion. But in Singapore, we are probably because of the broader context of state recognition of religion, policing that comes with that as well, and perhaps the non-affiliated's own religious tradition or beliefs. This comes from some surveys, a Pew survey as well. It's interesting that people with no religion in Singapore, 62% of them actually believe in God or some kind of unseen being. So we have a religious, non-affiliated group. They're quite religious in many ways. We've got, in some other surveys, we looked at many things. At least half of them believe in heaven. So there is some notions about the afterlife, about the supernatural. So it's not a group which is completely detached from anything which is spiritual. They do have considerations of spiritual. Sometimes you wonder whether this group is really the spiritual but not religious group. So it's not so much a group which completely leaves out religion from their, or spirituality from their considerations. And also when we look at some of their views and sentiments, we know that this group also has lots of respect for the beliefs of other religious groups. And so it's not a group which strongly feels that other religious groups have no valid space. And about 60% of non-affiliated say tolerance is a very important value to them. It's not very different from other groups, actually. So they're just as strong in terms of what they feel about the value of tolerance. The non-religious, of course, if you come down to areas where, and potentially over the years, you would see some of the friction and some of the divides. And these divides seem to only apply if you consider Christians and Muslims. Because in the other religious groups, you don't see a lot of difference. The real difference happens in two areas, and we have kind of looked at a lot of the data because we asked all kinds of questions. One is about people's belief in terms of spreading faith. In both Islam and Christianity have a stronger bent on being a little bit more willing to, proselyte or convert or declare notions of faith to others, and including notions of having faith in the public realm. Or religious leaders speaking up publicly about LGBT kind of issues. In both those cases, you notice a stronger reaction from those who are not religious. And of course, if you segment this study, you would notice that among young non-religious, they have a stronger view about that. And that's, again, to be expected. There might be stronger sentiments about that. So in general, a non-religious group, which is all right, which accepts, which understands that you want to accommodate people of different traditions and beliefs, but a group which, of course, is a little bit more wary about Christians who would speak up against different groups and make the space in what they would feel less inclusive. So if you probably are part of the bigger discourse that people have about including people of all kinds of backgrounds, including sexual backgrounds, that becomes an important hallmark of inclusivity. And so for them, trying to block that is a call. It goes against an important principle they hold on to, which is tolerance and inclusiveness, and you're trying to kill that, right? So that becomes a problematic aspect of it. Same with being in the public space and trying to preach, then of course conjures this idea that it's one which is not welcomed, one which is imposed on individuals, and then of course you have this pushback. Final point I'm closing. The other big consideration, I think you cannot run away from any discussion today about religion being in a plural society without thinking about the fact that a lot more religion now happens digitally. And we've always been thinking about religious sites and some of the things that happen with that, and how people interact on in face-to-face kind of relationships. But there are virtual communities, there are digital spaces, and there are many more spaces today that one can go to and find places where there might be conflict. I don't know how many people come on and watch Christian service if you're from another background, but sometimes if you watch a sermon and if you don't come from that tradition, you might be quite upset with sometimes what the preacher might say, for instance, and you might be very offended by that. So one wonders whether that would create, and we're very fortunate in Singapore so far. One, I think people don't spend time watching everybody else services, so that helps. But there are more and more potential sites where if, what you have is you have individuals who might just want to have some fun, and they slice out some portion of somebody's sermon which might have, said something which might not be very sensitive, and put it up on the internet, and it becomes viral. And these are places where you have points, tension points. Then you have this sudden awareness by other groups and say, wow, Christians really don't think much about us and they always mock us. So many of these things which can happen a lot more today on social media, in our digital forms of religion, and its open access to others. These are considerations that we need to keep in mind.